Welcome to Who Runs This Park, a podcast where you are invited into the hearts and stories of those who have committed their careers to the protection and preservation of our great national parks. Who Runs This Park aims to be a catalyst for inspiration, highlighting all that goes into managing our national parks and building a sense of appreciation for the invaluable beauty, diversity, and history of our protected lands. Today we have Ben Bobowski with us, Wrangell-St. Elias National Park and Preserve Superintendent. Wrangell-St. Elias is located in southeastern Alaska, stretching across more than 13 million acres. It's the largest national park in the United States and is known for its rugged, remote wilderness with towering peaks, glaciers, and river valleys. To put into context the vastness and beauty of this park, I wanted to highlight a quote of Alaska's previous Alaska governor and U.S. Senator as a recommendation to the Secretary of the Interior in 1938 to make the area a national park or monument. The region is superlative in its scenic beauty and measures up fully and beyond the requirements for its establishment as a national monument and later as a national park. It is my personal view from the standpoint of scenic beauty, it is the finest region in Alaska. I've traveled through Switzerland extensively, have flown over the Andes, and am familiar with the Valley of Mexico and with other parts of Alaska. It is my unqualified view that this is the finest scenery that I have ever been privileged to see. Ben himself has been superintendent since 2016, but has an extensive experience across the Park Service before that, including working at Rocky Mountain National Park, to representing the National Park Service internationally, to co-authoring the NPS Climate Change Response Strategy, to being awarded the Fulbright Global Scholar Award. We have so much to dig into regarding Ben's career and time at Wrangell-St. Elias. Ben, welcome to Who Runs This Park.
Well, thank you, Maddie. It's great to be here.
Can you share a memorable experience at Wrangell-St. Elias as superintendent so people can kind of get a feel for what this, our largest U.S. park is like?
Sure, I'd be pleased to. Before I share an experience, Maddie, I just want to give a shout out to all the people that I work with. The staff, the volunteers, the community, because they're really the fabric that keeps this place going. And when things don't go right, I'll take ownership for it. But when things are going well, it's because everyone's chipping in, and I'd be remiss if I didn't start with them. Most everywhere you look at Wrangell is a postcard. It's inspiring no matter where you're at. And I have yet to meet anyone who came here and was disappointed. Mm-hmm. But if I had to pick one experience that's memorable from nature, it's the first time I was flying over the Malaspina Glacier. The Malaspina Glacier is on the coast, close to the community of Yakutat. And it's about the size of Rhode Island. And to see it from altitude on a clear day is just amazing.
Wow.
So, yeah. And then with our subsistence here in the park, and we're going to talk about that, I'm sure, as our conversation continues, the first time I was on the Copper River and saw all the fish wheels along the park boundary, that was an inspiration, too, that this is a different kind of park.
What was that? The fish wheels?
Fish wheels, yep.
What is that?
So fish wheels are pieces of structure that actually spin. The wheel spins in a river by the current, and as it's spinning, it actually collects fish, salmon, that are coming upstream, puts them into a bin, and then folks harvest those in a lot of our fishing villages or little camps along the river. Yep.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'm excited because I believe I mentioned this in the intro, that you were awarded the 2024 to 2025 Fulbright Global Scholar Award. So first off, congratulations for that. But my understanding was, what I have marked is it was for, I don't know if this is a paper or a project, but Indigenous food security and micropeace innovations to long-term food access in protected areas, which is my understanding synonymous to some degree with subsistence use. So I'd love to hear a little bit more. We can, let's dive right in and talk about that study.
Yeah, I'm really fortunate to have received the award. It's a very competitive process. And
yes.
Of course, those of you familiar with Fulbright will know that it's to grow mutual understanding globally. And my thought partners in this are Dr. Sylvester out of the University for Peace in Costa Rica, and also Szymon Bobowski in Poland, director of the Tatras National Park. And those two partners are going to help me in the months ahead think about how to better provide for food security here in Alaska, and in particular, the Wrangell-St. Elias region and the Copper River. The interested pieces of this is that most people, when they think of national parks, don't think about food security as an issue.
Yeah.
But indeed, up in Alaska, it is. And what's interesting is that there's folks who have been living on the landscape for time immemorial, our tribal neighbors, And then there's other folks who've come in more recent history, European descendants.
Hmm.
And each of them approach food security in a different way. And that's the benefit of this partnership, is I can draw upon experience with indigenous cultures to the south and then European descendants to the east. The idea of micropeace, I just want to introduce that it's a concept you don't hear about much, but
Yeah.
we have a tremendous responsibility for. There was a scholar that put out a paper a while ago that talked about micropeace in the context of how we might fit in a local community level to having more global peace. And of course, peace isn't absent of conflict. In fact, it has conflict. It's kind of the civil discourse and the resolution to that that's
Yeah.
a point of focus. So that's it in a nutshell. It should be a great opportunity and hopefully be impactful when we're all done.
And what is that? Because I know I've heard of the Fulbright Scholar for like students coming out of school, and it's usually you're traveling to a certain country and have the resources to study in that area. What resources does having one provide for this endeavor?
Sure. I'd encourage folks to explore all the opportunities that Fulbright
Yeah.
provides to compete for, of which students is part of one, and then also for scientists, and in my case, specific to professional projects.
Hmm.
So I'm at a point in my career where I've been at this a little while and I'm trying to synthesize or kind of have a capstone experience to bring together a lot of disparate information. And that award comes with funding to have face-to-face time with local indigenous peoples in Costa
Hmm.
Rica and with my thought partner down there, and then also the same in the Tatras. So usually these things are extended over the course of an entire year. Mine will be over several months in kind of a focused effort, but that's all I need to make progress on this.
Yeah. And is it in tandem with your superintendent role, like as a part of your roles and responsibilities, or is it a separate thing?
Yeah, you'd be surprised how much of my job as superintendent of Wrangell-St. Elias is focused on food security. So there's
Yeah.
a direct nexus and
Oh, cool.
support in Alaska to focus on this for a little while, because as you probably know, Alaska parks are different,
Hmm.
and and because of that, my emphasis on that's important in a way that's different than the lower 48.
Yeah. National preserves are also different and have different regulations than national parks, is my understanding.
Correct. Yeah, the preserves typically have hunting that's provided for recreation or sport, and in the parks is typically hunting and trapping that's specific to federal subsistence.
Yes. Is that federal subsistence what you're referring to for the most part when you say Alaska parks do have some unique aspects?
Yeah, well, when you think about subsistence, I mean that's one part that's different for Alaska.
Yeah.
Perhaps the what's interesting about that is, as it relates to my project, is that food security is just a bit of that. When you think about subsistence, think about people living on the lands, off the lands for time immemorial. The fish, the wildlife harvested was just the beginning of providing food for the family or the person that gathered it, but
Hmm.
also the basis of an economy of sharing,
Hmm.
so that communities of people could live more comfortably on the landscape or certainly
Yeah.
survive. So it is different that way. But what's also different about Alaska parks in many ways has to do with access, traditional access
Hmm.
to the wilderness. So you'll probably find more airstrips in Wrangell-St. Elias than you would
Oh,
lower
interesting.
48 parks,
Yeah.
things like that.
Very cool. Taking a step back before we then come back to Wrangell St. Elias, what led you to initially work for the Park Service?
Well, it's a good question you ask, and I appreciate it, because I didn't find the Park Service. The Park Service found me.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I had worked with the Forest Service for a while, and they were kind enough to give me some funding to get a Master's of Science degree
Oh,
4 years
wow.
after 4 years after I sworn off from going ever back to college again, because I just
Yeah.
wanted to be outside. And it was in that experience I got to know quite a few people. And I had left that. I had graduated and moved on to a job. And it wasn't a matter of months later when I got a call that said the Glen Canyon National Recreation Area was looking for a range ecologist. And you can speak cowboy and you can speak Park Service and you can speak BLM. And we think you might be a good fit. So
Oh,
I
wow.
was pretty fortunate for that. And then they helped support me to get a PhD.
The Park Service did?
They did. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, that's what a funny twist of events to swear off school and then end up getting a PhD because that's the opposite.
My family harasses me all the time. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. And what was can you remind me what your PhD was in?
Yeah, I was basically asking the question, how can one person monitor and manage in a biologically and statistically meaningful way 1 million acres? Because that's about the footprint of Glen Canyon that we were
Oh,
working on at the
interesting.
time. So that was kind of a foundation that's informed much of my career, and I apply every day at Wrangell-St. Elias.
Yeah, I mean, take that and make it 13 million acres and ask that same
Exactly.
question. Yeah, that's
Exactly.
awesome. It came up quite a bit when I was or not interviewing, researching, but
Mhm.
it was mentioned that you have some experience representing the Park Service internationally. And I, first off, love traveling. And so anytime I hear stuff like that, I'm like, oh, interesting. And it's just as I continue to interview new superintendents, I'm learning more and more facets of the Park Service. And this is one I haven't gotten to talk about yet. So I'd love to hear about your experience doing that.
Yeah, you bet. Well, I've been really fortunate to get those experiences for sure. And when you work in some of our more iconic parks, you're almost often hosting delegates from other countries who are trying to bridge a gap of understanding between
Hmm.
United States parks and parks in their home country. So there's kind of a foundation of familiarity there. I think I think what's been interesting about my experience is right time, right place, and also right issues at the right time. I've been fortunate to work with the Tatras of Poland and Slovakia for quite a few years.
Hmm.
And in particular, it was a compare contrast relationship where we would have exchanges of staff and exchanges of ideas and try to improve in our own home park by learning from another country.
Hmm.
And that's one piece, the compare and contrast piece that's valuable. The other one is mutual understanding. I was fortunate to get asked to help represent the UNESCO Biosphere Reserve Program for the United States. Rockies was in that program at the time,
Okay.
and we were going through a renewal, but not everyone was in agreement about what that looks like.
Yeah.
And if you're familiar with the program, you probably know there's an element of governance that doesn't necessarily align well with our U.S. Constitution. So navigating language so that we could stay in the program and bridge with other countries was a point of that emphasis. And
Oh,
that mutual
interesting.
understanding was pretty cool. And then, lastly, I'll draw upon, we were also at Rocky's sister parks with many protected areas in Costa Rica. And
Oh,
that's
wow.
because we shared migratory species. More than 50 species migrated between those protected areas and the park. And we wanted to begin to help people think outside of our boundary because in
Hmm.
the long run, we're just Wrangell's not a little postage stamp, it's a big
Yeah.
postage stamp, but most parks are small
Yeah.
and we need our partners. So that's a little bit of background and experience.
Yeah, the one of the first superintendent interviews I did was with the Indiana Dunes superintendent. And this was
Mhm.
before I even knew that parks had partner or sister parks. And they have a sister park in Costa Rica for a similar reason of migratory birds, which I thought was fascinating to think. Yeah, just to kind of be thinking together in those things. And then I had another superintendent who'd said that nature doesn't know the boundaries of the park service. And so it's kind of like, how can you work with your partners? Because a bear does not know if it's in Wrangell-St. Elias or not. It just knows
Exactly.
it's in a wild place. So that's really cool. You also, my understanding, were a co author of the MPS climate change response strategy. So I would love to hear more about that and how you got involved in that.
Yeah, that's an interesting one for sure. Bobowski's pretty early in the alphabet system, and I'm often listed first, or among the first. And I just want to give a shout out to all my colleagues who were senior authors. I was a junior author at the time.
Okay.
But importantly, Maddie, as a junior author, mostly there to help keep things moving and organizing with the program and contributing in small ways. The folks who were really the powerhouses at the time, and there was several I got to be in the room with when that was being developed.
Yeah.
And that informed a lot of the work I immediately did thereafter at Rocky Mountain National Park and here at Wrangell. I've got additional publications since, and it taught me the importance of not arguing about climate change, but
Hmm.
talking about the real changes we're all seeing on the
Hmm.
landscape and how do we adapt to those and how do we think about it differently. So that informed the Borders project that connected us with Costa Rica and other locations.
Hmm.
That informed how we thought about when the flood came to Rocky in 2013 and we had to rebuild, how we rebuilt around that as a future scenario that'd be more likely. And it goes on and on.
That's cool. And how often does the Park Service do, I guess, climate change response strategy? Is it a certain cadence or was it more of in a response to a certain event?
Well, what was neat about that particular publication, it was the first time in my memory, in my career, in which everything was coming together in one location in terms of information about how to think
Yeah.
about it. It's been refreshed since and modernized, but the foundation is essentially the same. The nuance now is how do you lean forward with changes that are out of our control? We used to think that nature was predictable, and perhaps it was once more, but it certainly isn't now. So how do we respond to that change and unpredictability to be more resilient is an area where the new refresh is taking us towards. And then within each park, there's different scenarios that play out. I mean, for here at Wrangell, it's our
Hmm.
retreating glaciers. It's higher flows in the spring that's creating erosion. It was just 2 years ago, we watched a house float down the Copper River.
Oh my
Yep.
gosh.
And of course, if you're familiar with, anyone in your audience is familiar with Alaska, there's been numerous houses lost along the coast as the coastlines
Yeah.
continue to change.
Yeah, I was talking to the Kobuk Valley superintendent, and he shared that in Arctic regions, because I think Kobuk Valley is in the Arctic region or close to, that they actually see more effects of climate change. Like it's as you get higher and higher or lower globally, the effects are almost magnified.
That's my impression too. My understanding as you reach towards the poles, that's the case. And in fact, I mean, just 2 weeks ago, staff were able to report out to me, thinking through our trails in the park might be under dramatic change in the next years. We were already seeing
Mm.
changes, but our permafrost is starting to shrink, and with that comes an entirely different environment in which to operate.
Yeah, that was something I've learned as I've talked to Alaska superintendents as well, is just the like challenges with permafrost potentially changing and the role it plays in the ecosystem and stuff like that. So it was really interesting.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of refer back to an earlier point. We often don't necessarily address the issues as climate change because that term has become
Yeah.
polarizing for a lot of folks. What's really
Yeah.
interesting is understanding the landscape changes, the wildlife changes, the food sourcing changes. Those are things that everyone gets around the table, rolls up their sleeves, and tries to address and sort out, which is just awesome. So language can
Yeah.
matter, but it doesn't mean it's not important when we refer to climate change. It's just we use other terminology for it.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Another kind of piece of your experience that I wanted to touch into and learn more about was you're a speaker at the 12th World Wilderness Congress. I would love to hear more about what that event is in general and then what you spoke about.
Yeah, I was fortunate to attend that a few months ago now as a plenary speaker, and the event focused on reinterpreting wilderness through the Indigenous perspectives, fostering
Okay.
collaborative efforts in biodiversity protection. I mean, after all, when we think about the terminology with wilderness that we created here in the United States, it's almost often, not by everyone, but interpreted without people. And
Yeah.
this is a way to try to reconnect. And if you don't mind, I'd like to take just a moment and share a little bit of background of the story that I
Yeah.
told.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
if you think about all the national park units, they represent points in our history, right? And what
Right.
I did is tried to share a narrative that focused on the Western United States and the in particular American exceptionalism and the outgrowth of our settling of the country. And as some have come to publish about and talk about globally, it's kind of the foundation for what's termed fortress conservation, or the idea of
Hmm.
protecting the boundaries and keeping people to a minimum or highly controlling the access and such. And that idea of
Hmm.
fortress conservation and American exceptionalism, if you think about it, through our parks, through the lens of our parks, we have at least 3 in the Western United States that tell the story about fur traders and their pathways, such as Bensil Fort National Historic Site. We have 18 parks that tell the stories of the early expeditions, the trails and the railroads, forts, as the inspiration of westward expansion and manifest destiny began to take shape. We have
Hmm.
9 parks, at least, that bear witness to many battles and massacres of indigenous peoples as westward expansion
Hmm.
progressed, such as Sand Creek Massacre National Historic Site. We have at least 5 units that see the missionaries and the boarding schools that were established to assimilate the indigenous peoples, and schools segregated our Hispanic and Black citizens. We have at least a couple, although I'm surprised there's not more, that imagine the livestock producers and the cowboys and sheep herders who built expansive
Hmm.
empires and thousands of miles of fences fragmenting our landscapes. There's more than 14 national park units that focus on, or at least highlight, the buffalo soldiers, and they were always on the horizon, mounted to help protect the fortress of whatever park unit they were going to.
Hmm.
If you can imagine yourself still there, you'll notice at least 4 more that view the encampments that incarcerated our Japanese American neighbors during World War II. You'll view at least 7 national park units that highlight the fragmentation of landscape as fueled through homesteading, industrialization, and the installation of thousands of dams, forever changing the lifeblood the courses from the mountains to the canyons to the sea, such as Homestead National Monument. There's
Mhm.
at least three in particular, where you can be overwhelmed by the creation of the world's largest incendiary devices designed to wipe out swaths of humanity, such as the Manhattan Project National Historic Park. The human force was so staggering during that time and so pervasive, it forever changed our world. And when you think about that, it's no surprise that the fortress conservation concept took effect, where we would eradicate people from the landscape, indigenous peoples.
Mhm.
Setting the stage for that, we still feel that today, not just here, but around the world, because that
Mhm.
model's been proliferated. When you think about Yellowstone being the first, that's proliferated. What's neat about Alaska parks, and I call Park Service 2.0, is that humans are part of that landscape.
Yeah.
And that different perspective really changes how you relate to it. And in short, or in sum, this workshop, this conference was trying to create new connections so that we can see how to reimagine wilderness in a more holistic way where humans are part of the system, which would make us more resilient to all that change we were talking about just a little while ago.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really awesome. And I think you touched on the diversity of the Park Service. As people who have listened to this podcast so far, most of my interviews are with national park superintendents, but there's so much more like history to be told through national historic sites, national monuments, national fill in the blank, seashores,
They're all.
etc. But yeah, that's a cool, and that is something, I mean, like we talked about with subsistence lifestyle and all these things and that are present in the Alaska parks and kind of re-envisioning a way that we see nature. So what a great conference, I'm
It
sure.
was. It was very inspiring, to be sure.
Yeah. Switching into or transitioning into Wrangell St. Elias National Park and Preserve, you had said in, I think it was an interview, and I loved this. You said, "This may sound cliche, but I don't really think in terms of challenges near as much as I do opportunities." So I flipped the way I asked this question just for you of what are some opportunities for Wrangell St. Elias?
Makes me laugh. My kids harass me all the time about that.
Yeah, if my parents said something like that, or if yeah, I would use that against
Yeah,
them for sure.
yeah, and it's not lost on me that actually there was an exercise yesterday with staff in which we're struggling through our work planning for the year, and we had spent quite a bit of
Hmm.
time appropriately to identify and allow some venting around some of the challenges we have. But we
Yeah.
didn't miss the opportunity to talk about all the opportunities as well, and that kind of
Oh, good.
bookended the experience. And I think it's a matter of perspective. What Wrangell St. Elias offers in terms of opportunities is the opportunity to make work, to see how it works with what I'm calling NPS 2.0, where people are part of the system. And it really
Hmm.
does take a lot of work. It means we do more listening than talking. It means that we
Hmm.
have more olive branches to try to figure out mutual understanding. It means that decisions come a little bit more slowly than the fast paced of the lower 48, which growing up in New Jersey, I mean, New York Minute, that's what I grew up with. It took me a while to recalibrate.
Yeah.
But instead
Yeah.
of the metaphor of time is muddy, it's time is relationships. And that
Mm.
resiliency, that mutual understanding, that trust creates fidelity to the mission of protecting the park. And when you're getting
Hmm.
pennies on the acre to protect this place for future generations, having as many hands, with rolled up sleeves helping you makes a big difference. And
Yeah.
the model's not unique to Alaska. Much of rural America has that mindset. But I think it's something that we can always refresh our minds that there's more opportunities than problems most days.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good reminder, and I lived in New York for a bit, so I understand the quick pace, and I think that's kind of what I lean to more naturally. Like it comes less natural to me to not be fast paced and try to be super productive and efficient and all that
Mhm.
stuff. And this is a little tangent, but in a similar vein of I've been working on some more creative things, and the creative process is like the opposite of efficient. You just have to give it space and time. And similar with relationships, you can't be efficient, quote unquote, with relationships. And so I think what an opportunity to be focusing on relationships and working together as a group,
And reflecting on your
you
idea
know.
of creativity, Maddie, just triggered or inspired me to share. I think it helps me to think about things less transactionally, like the time is money piece, and more
Hmm.
reciprocally. And that reciprocity with each other can translate to the land, and
Mm,
that has the moment of creativity in which we can find new ways of old problems.
hmm.
And I just think it's rich, and sometimes I think we could do it more.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Kind of going off of that, what do you feel are some opportunities for Wrangell St. Elias?
Well, well, there's bunches. The opportunities immediately that are touching folks is trying to roll up our sleeves to figure out and better engage how we perpetuate subsistence. With the changing
Hmm.
landscape and such, it's requiring us to think differently. And the opportunity is to get people together. In fact, we piloted a new program this last year. We titled it the Center for Shared Stewardship. And rather than being a building, it's a conversation, a facilitated dialogue. And we had great
Hmm.
attendance for rural Alaska. Folks were brimming out the doors. And and the conversation was about how the landscape's changing and how are we reacting to it and what opportunities
Hmm.
lean forward. I think fundamentally because of the way that our professional piece instills in us such a strong way of thinking and a way forward, I think the opportunity is these pauses to try to grow mutual understanding because no one person's going to have the right answer. It's going to be a synthesis.
Hmm.
And you're probably looking for more tangibles. Sure, we can use some more buildings and there's opportunities for more trails and all that stuff.
Right.
But really the challenges that Wrangells faces is trying to align everyone's perspectives because we're so big
Yeah.
with 23 communities, 14 federally affiliated
Wow.
tribes, most of them unincorporated, which means they don't have a governance structure. The
Mm.
work around just trying to get everyone, not everyone, get more people rowing in the same direction than not is where the strength of those opportunities lie.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the coolest things to learn about, I mean, you have the Fulbright Global Scholar, project that you'll be working on, but can you share about some other research projects the park is working on?
Sure. And research is a real benefit to the Park Service in general. And coming from my last unit at Rocky Mountain, where we had a research learning center that really could
Hmm.
catalyze all that in a meaningful way, it's a little bit more sparse here because we're more remote. But that makes
Hmm.
each conversation that much more impactful in each project. So
Yeah.
probably what folks don't know is that the superintendent of the park is delegated an authority to manage the salmon on the Copper River. And the Copper River is 290
Interesting.
miles long. And
Okay.
and within the river, the state of Alaska is the primary manager for the site, but we're positioned in the park to ensure that federal subsistence occurs over time. So
Hmm.
anyway, that gives us a lot of questions about how to manage something that you can't see every day because the fish are in the river. And we have projects related to genetic diversity in different populations. We have projects related to the retreating glaciers and the effect of the high river flows
Mm.
on migrating salmon. We
Right.
have a variety of other projects related to that. Now, flip the script to the other side of what stares you in the face at Wrangell, and that's all the glaciers and that we have with over
Hmm.
3,000 glaciers. So we're spending a lot of time trying to understand them, and it's from the smallest level with retreating glaciers and trying to survey what we think might be hotspots to recover cultural artifacts
Oh,
before
interesting.
they melt into the landscape again, right? The retreating glacier exposes part of history. And then and
Wow.
then we're also just trying to understand how what the park might look like down the road. And more than one effort,
Hmm.
more than one scientist has shared that probably by 2100 we might be the last park in Alaska where you can come and see glaciers based upon just a large number of them.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's something we do spend a bit of time on because it's going to inform our future a bunch.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned, I think it was the glacier in your most memorable experience as superintendent, but is it the Malaspina
It is,
Glacier?
yes.
For folks, just for awareness, because I thought this was crazy, is a mass larger than the state of Rhode Island. I don't know if it
But
still
It
is,
still
that's
is.
but
insane.
Yep.
that's insane.
It's
Just,
totally insane. Yeah,
just,
it's hard to wrap your head around. And even when you see it, it's hard to wrap your head around. And it's so unimaginable, spectacular. The superlatives, I don't have all of them in my mind right now, but it's a natural landmark. It's a national natural landmark. And there aren't very many of those that we have. But the Malaspina is one because it is so amazing.
yeah, you mentioning superlative made me think of this is the only park that when I've researched, there was like a list of superlatives. And it was essentially, it's like, it's the largest national park. It's the largest national wilderness area. It's has four major mountain ranges. It has the second highest peak in the US. It has 9 of the 16 highest peaks and all these crazy things. You're like, oh my gosh, like this place is massive, massive, unique. I mean, it fits all the requirements to be a national
For
park,
sure.
obviously. But yeah, You mentioning that just made me think of that. Going into to get kind of talking about this, and we talked about your experience with the glacier, but is there a specific place within the park that holds a special meaning to you and why?
Yeah, I mean, I've got multiple places, of course, because of all those superlatives, right? So I often find myself not ranking one as the top, but
Right.
maybe top shelf. So a couple top shelf experiences, and I'll just try to draw you into thinking about being here in the wintertime when it's
Wow.
negative
Yeah.
35 degrees Fahrenheit or colder, and the air is so crisp you can see it sparkle,
Wow.
and all the spruce trees look like snow globes because I couldn't give an example that you might find in Texas. You'll have to get a snow globe to look.
The I've skied in Vermont and there was I mean, that's there's sometimes I've skied in a lot of other places, but for some reason there it was like the trees looked like a snow globe where like they were all iced
And
over
that's
and it was
then
crazy.
that's common, right? And what that is that it just creates this stillness that contrasts the nutty day-to-day stuff we all deal
Mhm.
with and kind of recenters your or recalibrates. And and then I like to return to the same spot after darkness because many nights the northern lights come out and you go from that stillness to just magic and inspiration in a way that, again, if you've seen the northern lights, I bet you can imagine what that looks like. And if you
Yeah.
haven't, it's worth making a trek to figure that out because they're
Yeah.
really spectacular.
Yeah, that's a good way to think of it. I've never for some reason thought of it of like literally being like magic in the sky, but it's like out of a Disney movie.
It is. And, I think it's helpful to be concretely realistic in science, but not lose our sense of wonder and care, right?
Mhm.
And the Northern Lights for me reminds me of that.
Yeah, that's a great another this is a silly example, but I was in the I think it's the Tower of London, which is a museum in London, and they have the world's largest diamond on like a staff from one of the old kings or queens, and talking about like awe and wonder, literally seeing it, you're like, this is why Disney thinks that staffs are like magic. It was like, I mean, magnetizing. You would walk by it and they had these conveyor belts that would go by it, and I just kept going back and back. I was mesmerized. So I imagine I have not seen the Northern Lights yet, but I do hope to at some point. And yeah, I can imagine it being absolutely just magical.
That's awesome.
You mentioned some of the glaciers, and for folks to know, you know this, but about or around one third of the park is covered in glaciers, which, again, for folks, a reminder this park is 13 million acres. So that's a lot of glaciers. Can you share, and you've spoken about it a little bit, but how do you feel it makes it unique from a management perspective?
Well, the first thing I'll draw your attention to is that glaciers. Well, let me stop. I had someone up from the lower 48. And we were exploring the park together, and we're highlighting the glacier piece, but also specifically the large wilderness that we have here.
Hmm.
And the individual used the word empty. It's so empty, and no one's out. And I took great delight in helping them understand that not only are there people out there, but there have been people out there for time immemorial. And there's routes across the glaciers that were traversed, and there's tremendous amount of activity there today. So
Yeah.
when you think about glaciers and like, well, you don't have to worry about a third of the park. It's just the opposite actually, and it's just very different from our lower 48 experience in
Yeah.
particular.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so so that's how I think about
You've spoken to this a few times and we've mentioned it with subsistence lifestyle and all of that, but can you share how Wrangell St. Elias preserves the cultural heritage of the indigenous people that have lived in the area?
it. Yeah, so I'm going to use the word you used and maybe bridge to a different word if that's okay. And
Yeah.
you mentioned the word lifestyle, and maybe I'll replace it with a term of way of life.
Mm,
So for our indigenous neighbors, we don't work to protect their culture in the way you might think. It is more about they're our neighbors, and they've lived on this landscape with a way of life of sustaining themselves along the way, and we try to support opportunities to for them to continue to be resilient, much like we do our any other neighbors. I
mm,
think I think what might be striking for some folks to understand is, the word wilderness, which we've talked about, is not in the vocabulary of our tribal neighbors. They just refer to Wrangell St. Elias as home, and
mm,
honestly, just a piece of home because they the in particular I'm referring to right now is our Otna neighbors used to inhabit and nomadically roam between Denali National Park and Wrangell St. Elias. So if you really want to stretch your mind and you think Wrangell is big, now put the footprint all the way to Denali
yeah.
and include Denali National Park. So it's mostly trying to help and be good to be a good neighbor. Now, We
Mhm.
do have the Otna Cultural Center here, and it is staffed by our tribal partners, and that's to facilitate their own story being told by themselves.
Mm,
You know, we'd like to be able to do that for everybody because, the park was established on traditional homelands of four Alaska Native peoples, the Upper Tanana, the Eyak, the Yakutat Tlingit, and the Otna. But right now, we've only been able to afford this first cultural center.
yeah, that's cool though. And I like how you phrase that. First, kind of saying the way of life, and then also that there are opportunities for each, looking for opportunities and making sure those opportunities are facilitated and supported for them to tell their own stories. You mentioned this with kind of connecting it to Denali National Park, but the park is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And can you share what that means from a management perspective, just for folks who aren't aware?
Yeah, I mean, if you're familiar with World Heritage Sites, roll up all those superlatives that we were talking about earlier, and then recognize that it's not only important to America, it's important to all the people on the planet. It
Yeah,
stands out that amazingly, and we're really grateful to be part of that system. The
yeah,
the fact the fact remains that it's mind numbing for me at times because it expands our relationship from 13 million acres thinking about things to over 24 million acres
wow.
and our partners in another country and so forth. What's best about that for us at this point in our history is that quite literally there's a camaraderie within the World Heritage Site that if I pick up the phone tomorrow and say I need some help, our neighboring rangers would do their level best to help us.
Yeah,
And this happens every year. It happens with search and rescue. It happens with glacier monitoring. It happens with wildlife protection, and it's just really neat thing to feel that you could just someone way far away, hundreds of
yeah,
miles away,
yeah,
is working towards the same goals as you.
yeah, yeah. That's awesome. Because I don't know if this is a separate thing or if it's part of the same grouping, but is it the World Heritage Site that is the world's largest international protected wilderness?
I believe that's true for land. I don't
Okay.
know the current statistics for anything that may be in the oceans. There have been a number of large
Uh,
protected areas in the oceans, and I just don't have that fact at the tip of my tongue. But
yeah,
it's worth recognizing that we're at least among the biggest. That's the top shelf idea, but
yeah.
there's other ones out there too.
Yeah. Can you share it being, I guess, one of the world's largest international protected wilderness areas, how that enables wildlife to flourish and how you work with neighboring entities regarding like migrations and stuff like that?
Well, yeah, I want to call out that when the parks were created back in the 80s here in Alaska. Now, no, there's a handful of parks that existed before 1980, but in a law that called ANILCA, or the acronyms ANILCA, it took advantage of our learning from the lower 48 NPS 1.0 by having people part of the system
Hmm.
in 2.0, but it also acknowledged, I think, well, that larger landscapes are important to the long-term resiliency of all the things we care about in nature.
Yeah.
So this larger landscape for the park unit itself, it combined with all the parks in the heritage site, just creates a super protected space for birds, for all forms of wildlife, for plants, which means what? It means that when we think about invasive species, do we have them? Yes, but they're almost always right immediately along the road system, or increasingly a little concerned about some plants coming in on float planes.
Oh,
But
interesting.
but we're not in
Totally
the same
interesting.
circumstances as lower 48 parks at this time
Yeah.
because
Yeah. Or Hawaii.
we're Hawaii. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense, and kind of touching on the resiliency aspect is really cool. One thing that's unique that we haven't touched on, my understanding is on some private land within the park, there's actually active mining. Can you share a little bit more about that and what that looks like?
Yeah. And it's something that is not common when we think of national parks, right?
Yeah.
To have mining within a park. We have hundreds of thousands of privately held or state-based or tribal lands within the park. So
Hmm.
imagine a patchwork of lands that are within the legislative boundary that quite literally are our neighbors.
Yeah.
So when we think about mining, when I think about mining, the first thing that I helps me to recognize is that people on the landscape have been harvesting these minerals for trade, for tools, for a long, long time. And then in the early 1900s, around the advent of industrial mining in this area,
Mm-hmm.
it really exploded. So, and by exploded, I mean is that there's lots of sites within Wrangell-St. Elias because it's mineral rich in places.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the consequences of mining that we think about is the abandoned mines, and we've
Yeah.
got hundreds of them. And there's a whole mindset and work around that to make sure that folks stay out of harm's way, or at least are warned about harm. The other one is, and probably no surprise to those who think about mines, is we have two CERCLA sites, which has to deal with the remediation of sites that became contaminated.
Oh,
And
interesting.
yep, and that takes a bit of work, and it's a long grind of a process to address all of that. But it's the right process to follow in certain circumstances.
And
And
what
then
did
we
you call
have
that site? The
it's a
two.
yeah, it's a CERCLA site. So it stands for the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act. It was created by
Oh,
Congress in 1980, but it creates a framework with how to clean these places up.
oh, cool.
And then we have active mines,
Mm-hmm.
or sites that could be mined that are not active. And as neighbors, we try to work with them to align their interests with the park's interests to
Yeah,
to have a minimal impact. And we've been reasonably successful. And then where we aren't successful, we monitor more intensively
yeah,
just to try to make sure there's no impacts. But it's on a landscape that you live in, and if you're carrying a cell phone or you're driving a vehicle, you almost likely benefited from a mine somewhere. So the folks here take a different tack to it than maybe you might otherwise.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. There was some interesting conversations with, like, for example, Gates of the Arctic, and there's the proposal to build a road that would lead to a mining site. And so it's just interesting to see different parks in different stages. And like Gates of the Arctic is a unique park in that it has no trails, and it's a different type of wilderness, I guess, experience.
Yeah, that's a good point, Maddie, is where we are in stages, right? If you think about these issues like mining on a continuum, I've been told Wrangell St. Elias has, if you think about any issue in Alaska with any one park, Wrangell St. Elias has all of them combined into one. So in our areas that are currently roadless, we work hard to maintain them unless
Yeah.
there's a legal requirement for access.
Yeah.
Of course, yeah. So I get it.
Keeps it interesting.
It does.
As we wrap up our time, final dual question I ask is, or I ask all the superintendents, is what's something you wish everyone knew about Wrangell St. Elias, regardless of if they've been or not? And then what's a common misconception or myth about the park you'd like to debunk?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. And also, Maddie, thanks for the opportunity over the last hour. It's been fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'd like to just draw attention to the fact that people are on the landscape in a concept we call inhabited wilderness. We're not the first
Mhm.
one to use the term inhabited wilderness, but if folks could stretch their mind about that, about the park, I think that's something that can carry forward to lots of places
Yeah.
along the way. And one myth I'd like to debunk is a lot of folks come to Kennecott, Kennecott National Historic Landmark, because it is celebrating, in a way, one of the largest copper mines ever to exist on the planet, which really
Mm.
informed a lot of not just the industry, but also all kinds of ways to maneuver and survive in the wilderness and electrify the country,
Mhm.
among many other things. And I just want to call everyone's attention that everyone thinks the Park Service manages it, and we don't. We
Mhm.
actually have interest in some of the key buildings, to be sure, but it's part of a residential community. So
Oh,
folks
interesting.
expect to come with all Park Service rules and are surprised sometimes to see the things they see.
Look at that. We're learning stuff every day. Thank you for that. Well, thank you for your time. I agree. It's been a great time learning more about your park and your experience. Yeah, appreciate your time, Ben.
Thank you, Maddie.
Thanks so much for listening today. Our music was composed by Danielle Bees. If you liked this podcast, rate, review, download, and tell your friends about it. This ensures the stories of our national parks and how they are run are shared. Listen to the other episodes wherever you listen to your podcasts or visit us at whorunsThisPark.com to learn more. I'm Maddie Pellman, and you've been listening to Who Runs This Park.